Welcome to Denver Gazette Sports Podcast. I am your host, Chris Schmedeke. It is Tuesday morning in the Mile High City, and we are all still kind of recovering from a crazy Monday Night Football game over at Empower Field. So I am joined by Chris Thompson. Chris, how are you on this Tuesday morning?
I'm doing well. I'm ready to go, and it's the bye week, but we'll still have some copy coming.
We will. We'll still. I'm sure the Broncos will still make news somehow. And Kyle Fredrickson is with us as well. Kyle, how are you after that crazy game over there on Monday night?
I'm doing well. I sort of had to rub my eyes and think, hey, was that Peyton Manning out there slinging for the Broncos? That was a vintage performance, something we haven't seen from this team in a while.
So, all right. So I'm struggling, guys, on where to start with this game because so much happened. In the Broncos 41-32 win, Broncos move to 8-5, have a pretty good grasp on that seventh seed. We'll talk a little bit about their upcoming schedule at the end. So I want to ask you guys, Chris, I want to start with you. The biggest moment slash play in that game last night.
Well, it's got to be Jaquan McMillan's pick six because the Browns were moving the ball. They were down to about the 42, 1st and 10. I mean, they looked to be in prime position to get themselves in a go-ahead field goal. And then Jaquan McMillan picks the ball off and falls to the ground, and nobody touches him. And he figures, what the heck? I guess I'll get up and run. And all of a sudden, he's in the end zone, and it's a 9-point game, and it's pretty much over, even though Cleveland had a big drive. But yeah, I mean, credit the Browns' resiliency. I mean, also there was the Nick Bonito pick six, of course, 71 yards in the first half, but the Browns kind of came right back down late in the first half and made up for that with a touchdown. So 3 hours, 29 minutes, quite an emotional, draining game last night.
Kyle, what about you? It's probably McMillan's pick, I'd have to imagine. But I mean, I think the Mims touchdown is probably up there as well.
Yeah, I think, CT's right that in a vacuum, that play is the play that was most important in the game. It sealed it. It showed how resilient this Broncos defense was on a day when really they got shredded by Jameis Winston through the air. But I'll kind of take the big picture approach. And I do think that Bo Nix throw to Marvin Mims ultimately is going to be what this fan base remembers. And nationally, what's finally going to get people to start looking at this Broncos team and Bo Nix as being that guy, right? That's a 3rd and 11 play deep in the Broncos' own territory. The Browns had a shifting coverage. I watched Dan Orlovsky break down the play on Twitter this morning, and Nix recognized that essentially Marvin Mims just had to beat his guy one-on-one, and with perfect ball placement, it was a play that really kind of showed how explosive this offense could be again, right? I mean, we haven't seen explosive plays like that from a non-Peyton Manning led Broncos squad in a very long time. I think is tied for the 3rd or 4th longest touchdown reception in Broncos history, going back to Jay Cutler being the last guy to be able to make a play that explosive. So, there were so many emotional swings in this game. Even after that play, it looked like the Browns might come back and win it. But to me, that's really just the flash of talent that validates what the Broncos have been saying about Bo Nix all along, that yes, he, compiled all the stats at Oregon, and you can call him a system quarterback, but he really did flex that arm strength and that smarts on that play, and something that Broncos fans will be talking about for a while.
So before we dive more into the defense, we'll do our Marvin Mims minute here real quick. And Chris, Sean Payton has made a really big effort to get him more involved, and it's paid off the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, finally we can't say to Sean Payton, well, why isn't Marvin Mims, or Mimsy as he calls him, getting the ball? I mean, that was an ongoing question. And then at one point he never was getting the ball, so everybody just kind of gave up. So it's later than people thought, but credit Sean Payton for getting Marvin Mims the ball. I mean, he's catching some passes, obviously. He's lining him up in the backfield, and he's made him kind of quite a versatile type weapon. He doesn't get as many, an Eric Metcalf time from yesteryear, if you want to name from yore. But yeah, I mean, I would try to think of even more ways of trying to get him the ball, especially with their running attack being up and down. Although Jaleel McLaughlin did have a solid game, 84 yards rushing. So he wins the hot hand award for Monday's game. But Javonte Williams, 4 carries, 1 yard. But he did get a 2-yard touchdown run. Of course, that hole was so big, you or I could have run through it. But yeah, Mimsy definitely has been a huge asset in recent weeks for the Broncos.
Mimsy minute. That's what we're going to call it from now on. But let's go back to the defense because, the story going into this was the national audience is going to see Bo Nix, but also going to see this Broncos defense that was been dominant. And Kyle, that just did not happen yesterday. And I think I'll get your opinion on this. I think Vance Joseph was kind of painted into a corner because he loves to play man when Riley Moss is out there. We know that Riley Moss is not out there. Levi Wallace is out there, not his shining moment yesterday, got burned a lot. So was Vance Joseph kind of stuck with his defensive calls? Because they did not seem to pressure Winston as much as I thought they would either.
Yeah, it wasn't the best performance by this defense, hands down. I think they've played better at times this year. But you mentioned it, the absence of Riley Moss and also Brandon Jones getting hurt in that game and then not coming back. I mean, that's 2 starters in your secondary against, let's face it, Jameis Winston-led Browns offense that has a little bit of punch to it, right? I mean, we've gotten this far into the podcast. We haven't really mentioned Jerry Jeudy's name, but he's dynamic. He showed it. He's capable of burning lesser cornerbacks. And, maybe Levi Wallace, didn't win that starting job for a reason over Riley Moss to begin the year. But that's a quality offense and a quality playmaker. So, it's the resilience for me that stands out, right? I mean, at the end of the day, this was a defense that scored 14 points for its offense on a day when Bo Nix was still humming. They really kind of collectively made up for the lack of a ground game. It's kind of bizarre that the Broncos are in this position and they can't run the ball. Maybe we can talk about that later, but defensively, the pass rush did get there by the end of the game. I thought it maybe wasn't as regular as we expected, but I mean, once again, Nick Bonito just playing with his hair on fire. And I believe initially they had given partial credit of that sack to Jonathan Cooper, but I'm glad that they gave it back to Bonito because he really was the one-man wrecking crew on that play. So, their stars are showing up, right? And at this point, do we talk about Bonito being like a player of the year candidate, double-digit sacks? I mean, interception return for a touchdown. We'll see how he finishes out the year, but at this point, there's not many outside linebackers playing better than him.
Well, I do want to talk about Nick Bonito a little bit, like you just said about defensive player of the year, but we got to talk about Jerry Jeudy. Like we've probably gone long enough. And Chris, he seemed to be enjoying himself out there. He was enjoying egging on the crowd. He was enjoying, putting his hand up to his ear and all that stuff. At the end of the day, the Broncos get the win. But he had an interesting comment, and I don't know, I'm sure you were in the Broncos locker room there, that something about, I heard there was a lot of boos, but I had a lot of catches. It doesn't seem like Jerry Jeudy will ever change. He kind of is the same guy no matter what.
Yeah, I had a chance to talk to Jerry Jeudy at length in August at Browns training camp, and he's a confident guy, and
yes.
B, he certainly cares about Jerry Jeudy because one of the things he said was, I want to be the highest paid receiver in the NFL, which, of course, I thought was crazy, him saying that in August. But he looked, if you just take last night, he looked like he should be the highest paid wide receiver in the NFL. I mean, he had just an incredible game, and, the Browns lost, but it did Jerry Jeudy from seeing his comments and reading Paul Klee's fine article. He certainly wasn't in that mode of like, oh, it doesn't matter, we lost, or, oh, I'd trade all my yards for a victory. No, I mean, the Browns are hopelessly out of it. Big deal if they're 4-8 or they're 3-9. I mean, Jerry Jeudy accomplished what he wanted to do, and he put up huge numbers. And, a lot of people were wondering, well, why didn't this happen in the last 4 years with Denver? But he did it. He had an incredible game last night, and there's still a chance he could be back in Denver next season if the Broncos finish third in the AFC West, and Cleveland can catch Cincinnati for third in the AFC North. Mr. Judy will be back at Empower Field next year.
So, Chris, is this a thing with Vance Joseph? Why didn't Surtain just follow him around? I know some defensive coordinators are against that, but why didn't Surtain just follow around Jerry Jeudy?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it would be great if Vance Joseph was talking to the media this week and could answer that, but it's a bye week, so he won't. I mean, Surtain had great numbers last night, and they didn't throw to him much, which made perfect sense, especially with Riley Moss out, as you guys had touched upon before. Brandon Jones out. They just went other directions, and their other receivers were also catching some balls, so it wasn't like there was like one guy out there. I mean, Jameis Winston threw for 497 yards, and a little bit less than half of them were to Jeudy, so there were some other receivers catching balls out there. But moving forward, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, it'll be interesting to see those injuries. I mean, Riley Moss, it was an MCL. Mike McGlinchey missed 4 games. He went on IR when he had an MCL. I know that Moss didn't go on IR, so I don't think it's a 4-game deal. But will he be back for the Colts on the 15th and the Chargers on the 19th? We don't know. And Brandon Jones is a groin injury. We all know how troublesome groin injuries could be. So it's going to be very interesting moving forward in these key games who will be available for Denver in the secondary.
This bye week is coming at a perfect time. It's really weird that it's week 14 that they're getting this bye, but it's definitely coming at the right time. Kyle, you were talking about Nick Bonito. Let's talk about him a little bit more because you had a great story in Sunday's Denver Gazette about his off the field stuff as well. He's becoming one of the faces of this Broncos defense.
Yeah, 100%. And it's just really his feel for where the quarterback is on some of these pass rushes, right? And that was something that Jonah Ellis told me, when I asked him, like, what really stands out on film? It's the speed, it's the length, but there's such great awareness on Benito's part of just understanding where the ball is at, where the quarterback is at, and then using all those physical tools to locate him and bring him down. And it's just we could be looking at a defense with him and Zach Allen and Pat Surtain all being Pro Bowl players, right? So, it's a kudos to, the development of these guys. And, Benito was a 2nd-round pick, but, he wasn't a star right away. Kind of mimicked his time at OU. He was a high-level prospect, coming out of St. Thomas Aquinas High School in Florida. That's a powerhouse program that puts out a lot of top kids. And he redshirted his first year at OU, and I know that wasn't an easy process for him, but it's kind of been that way since, with going to the NFL, needing a little time to develop. And now that he's playing free and kind of playing, to his strengths, it's been really fun to watch. And he's a very humble guy. To your, you mentioned it earlier in my story. He was out in Aurora before Thanksgiving, handing out turkeys to over 200 families as part of a donation drive that he set up. It wasn't even something that the Broncos told him or asked him to do. So just a sign of a guy who's settling in. He's due for a big extension. CT's talked about that previously. Jonathan Cooper thinks that he's a guy in line for a big deal to stay with the Broncos, and Benito wants to stay. And after that game last night, I think there might be some more number 15 jerseys spotted in the stadium because, man, was that an electric play on that pick six. I also like the towel waving behind him just for the aesthetics. It was a fun play to watch.
A great, first of all, 15. We don't need to, we know who 15 was here. We don't need, we don't need to go down that route. But there was a funny comment from Troy Aikman when after that pick on the broadcast is Jameis was going to catch him, and Aikman swears he could beat Jameis in a foot race. Now. Like he could beat him now at his age. Foot race. That was
not Jameis's strength. He can sling it, man. He threw some great balls. I mean, the narrative of that game would have flipped real quick with just a couple of different plays to where the Browns would be humming. And I'm happy for Jameis. Just, obviously one of the best personalities in the league. Even if the Browns aren't doing that well, maybe
that's not a free
signed in Cleveland. Yeah, he'll get a starter's job somewhere next year, I would imagine.
But the Browns are not a 3-8 team. There is
No.
talent on that team for sure. Chris, is there any chance that now Benito starts floating into that Defensive Player of the Year conversation? He's only a sack out of the lead, I think, for sacks. He's got the pick six. Probably got some forced fumbles in there. I don't have his exact stats. Like, he's got to be at least considered.
Yeah, I mean the Monday night game, always helps and that sort of thing. But that might be a stretch to say that Benito will be Defensive Player of the Year. Pat Surtain's a guy whose name has been thrown out, and he certainly has more of a resume entering this season. But yeah, that's not to take anything away from Benito. Still a lot of football to be played and what have you. But yeah, anytime you can have a huge game on Monday Night Football, that helps, and that's certainly going to help for Pro Bowl votes and that sort of thing, because players get 1/3 of the Pro Bowl votes, and they're all sitting watching at home on Monday night versus other days of the week. Maybe they watch the Thursday games. I don't know if they're Amazon Prime subscribers, but yeah, I mean, anytime you come up big on Monday night when everybody is watching, that's going to help you for the Pro Bowl. And hey, maybe Jerry Jeudy gets in the Pro Bowl based upon his sterling performance Monday night.
So we haven't talked about the offense much yet, except for the big Nix to Mims play. So let's flip over to that and talk a little bit more about Bo Nix, Kyle. 18 of 35 for 294, one TD, the two picks. The one pick was the tip ball, was kind of a weird play. Was not sacked though. And you got Myles Garrett over there. This Browns defense is aggressive with Jim Schwartz. Nix is every week, it's just like this. He almost plays like a veteran at times.
He does. And he's just figuring out a way to where this lack of a true running game is hurting the Broncos. I mean, looking at this box score from last night, I mean, Jaleel McLaughlin's their leading rusher with 14 carries for 84 yards. And that's 6 yards a carry. That's really not bad, but it was never a steady flow of run. It was never, moving the ball, on third and short with tough gains. There was a lot of negative plays. I mean, Javonte Williams, 4 carries for 1 yard. CT mentioned it in the open. The one touchdown sort of skews his stat line, but he's just resilient, Nix, and the way he leads this offense. The one interception, not totally on him. The Browns cornerback makes a great break on the ball. It pops up in the air. The second pick, it seemed like that was a point where Nix kind of had a heat check. He was feeling himself with the deep ball. Kind of just threw up a jump ball to, I think, Marvin Mims on that play. And Denzel Ward, who's a Pro Bowler, he comes up with the football. So there's going to be those learning moments. And this wasn't that, pristine 300 plus yards, 3 touchdown game that we've seen out of Nix at different points in the year. But I think this win is just as impressive as any of the other ones, right? Just with the way that this team made plays when they had to. Nix hits that humongous play to Mims, like I talked about in the open. So really just a lot to like. And for the Broncos, I guess they have this bye week to continue figuring out how to run the football better, because, we've talked about this hot hand approach. That's all good and well when one guy is really playing great, but I was really confused why they didn't go with a heavier dose of Audric Estime last night. I mean, he only got 3 carries, after Sean Payton was on his conference call, going on and on about how Estime had to get more involved, and how it was kind of on the coaching staff that he hadn't broken out yet because he needed more opportunities. So, we'll see how that continues to develop. At this point, I don't know what the Broncos are looking for in Javonte Williams. He usually plays well after a bad game. So maybe he does end up bouncing back. But a lot of question marks with this running game.
Well, if I can jump in on Estime,
go ahead.
I think the major issue with him is pass blocking as a rookie. And I mean, they're throwing a lot more than they're running it. So I think that's the reason that Payton has been reluctant to give Estime a tremendous amount of snaps, because it kind of telegraphs a little bit when he's in that he's going to run the ball. Yeah, and that's the deal with McLaughlin too. I mean, he likes Javonte Williams even when he's putting up terrible rushing totals because he's a very good pass blocker.
So let's talk about Chris. Let's talk about the Knicks Cortland Sutton relationship. It just continues to blossom each week. Sutton was his guy on third down. The Broncos were great on third down yesterday. Just talk a little bit like that. Just keeps developing each week between the two of them.
Yeah, it does. And I had written my NFL Insider a couple days ago before the game, talking to some former Broncos multi-thousand-yard receivers, Rod Smith, Emmanuel Sanders, Steve Watson, and they talked about Cortland Sutton. I mean, they love the guy. They love the connection that is starting with Bo Nix. And Sutton's now up to I guess he had 6 catches, 102 yards last night. He's up to 868 for the season. So he could very easily pass 1,000 yards in that December 19th game against the Chargers, unless he has an absolutely huge game against the Colts. But yeah, it's really been a great connection. I mean, early in the game, Sutton did drop a pass, which was out of character for him, but Nix came right back to him with a first down type pass, and he's kind of his security blanket. I mean, when he absolutely positively has to get a first down, has to get some yards, he's able to find Sutton. And then, when teams start worrying too much about Sutton, he's got the other guys, the rookies, Devon Vele, Troy Franklin, and then Mimsy.
So while we're talking about that, Chris, let's talk about the decision that the Broncos have, which is on Josh Reynolds. Today, they have to make a decision if he's coming off IR or not. We were debating off air about what they do. What do they do? Because this receiver group is clicking. And, sometimes people forget that Josh Reynolds is on the team, I think, at times. So what do you think? What is your kind of thoughts on that?
I mean, unless something is going on that I'm not privy to regarding his state after the trauma of being a victim of a shooting October 18th in Denver, I would be greatly surprised if he's not activated. I mean, they haven't needed him lately. Other wide receivers have stepped up, but down the stretch, if you have a couple of receivers that get hurt and you're sitting there with a key game at the end of the year or in the playoffs and he's out for the season and he's standing on the sidelines in street clothes, that's not going to help you. He's still a veteran receiver who potentially could help the Broncos down the stretch. So unless something's going on that I don't know about, I would be very surprised if he's not activated. That doesn't necessarily mean he's going to play a lot for the rest of the season or what have you, but they have to make a decision. And because if they don't activate him, they've started his 21-day window, 3 weeks ago. He's done for the rest of the season and he can't play for him.
So, Kyle, I want to stick with the receivers a little bit because on the broadcast, they were talking about this draft class as a whole for the Broncos. Nix in the first round, Estime, Vele, Troy Franklin, Jonah Ellis on the defensive side. We've talked about this before. The Broncos have a young core now, and it's something they haven't had in a long time.
Yeah, 100%. And when it comes to their receivers, the decision to move on from Tim Patrick all of a sudden makes a little more sense, right? I think all of us at one point kind of questioned that, with the feel-good nature of him finally coming back from injuries. He's a leader in that locker room, but the Broncos are young. This is a youth movement. They believe in the guys they drafted. Even when it looked early on, like Troy Franklin maybe had a little bit of a bust written on him, he's continued to show out and make big plays and be a guy who's trusted on third down. Vele, another guy who always seems to be, making at least one big catch a game. And then, of course, yeah, you mentioned it, and I wrote about it not too long ago, but this entire rookie class, just, hats off to George Payton and this entire scouting staff for finding guys that fit Sean Payton's system. So just a lot to like about this group.
So let's talk about this upcoming schedule a little bit, Chris, because like I said, they're on the bye week, then it's Indy, then it's that Chargers game, Cincy, and KC. So they got four games left. Am I doing my math right? Yeah. I mean, the Broncos pretty much have it all handed to them with this schedule. They know who they have to go out there and they have to beat. That KC game may not mean anything. So these next three games are just completely pivotal for a playoff chase.
Yeah, especially December 15th, the Colts, December 19th, the Chargers.
Yeah, all in a
The
5 day
Colts are
span.
2 games behind the Broncos. If they can beat them on the 15th, they're 1 game behind. They've got the tiebreaker, and the Colts' schedule down the stretch is ridiculously easy. So it could be some minor panic time if they somehow lose to the Colts on the 15th, and then especially if they lose to the Chargers, they could find themselves in just a 1 week span, being in the number 8 spot. But we'll have to see how that plays out. Miami is worth keeping an eye on simply because they're assured of winning the tiebreaker. They're 2 games behind. If they pretty much have to win out and would need the Broncos to lose 2 games for Miami to catch them for the number 7 spot. I mean, the Bengals, forget it. I mean, they could be eliminated from the playoffs before even that week 17 game when they play host to the Broncos. And then, of course, that last game against Kansas City is very interesting because, will the Chiefs have wrapped things up? Will they be playing starters? But as crazy as this sounds, think of if somebody had said this at the start of the season, there possibly could be a scenario week 18 with the Chiefs that the Broncos are the ones resting starters and the Chiefs are the ones that are playing starters and have something to play for, because it's certainly possible, especially if the Broncos beat the Colts, that they'll have everything wrapped up for a playoff berth entering week 18.
And Kyle, what now it really seems, Sean Payton last year was such a weird season with Russ and everything. And now this year, I have to feel the Bronco fans feel very confident with Sean Payton right now and how they're rolling into this last 4 game stretch. He should get some conversation for Coach of the Year. He probably won't win, but still, they have to feel great about where this team is at.
Yeah, I mean, this was the plan, right? I mean, when they sat down and knew they were going to have that first round pick, they knew they needed a new quarterback. I think when Sean came out of retirement to coach this team, this is the opportunity he wanted, right? Sort of like that next Drew Brees type quarterback to continue running his system in a place that was willing to sort of, let him run the show in a big sense. I think that he probably has a pretty oversized hand in a lot of decision making just because of the respect that he garners. And yeah, he won't win Coach of the Year, I don't think. I think Dan Campbell with the Lions is a likely candidate with how well they're playing. A few other guys are going to have strong cases. But we'll see what happens. The Broncos have been so fortunate with their health. I mean, I think they're 1 or 2 injuries away from, really being in a spot where winning a playoff game or getting to the playoffs is going to be a struggle. We saw that with the secondary. But on the whole, I mean, Knicks is as advertised, and we mentioned it. That was a national audience last night that got to know the Broncos, and we'll see if they can sustain this momentum. I think there's still going to be a lot of doubters out there just based on the fact that they can't run the football very well. But as to this point, they've found ways around that.
So before we go, guys, Kyle and I were talking about this before. Mike Shanahan is not a finalist for the Hall of Fame. They're taking Mike Holmgren over Mike Shanahan. Chris, explain that to me. I don't get it. Super Bowl 32 never happened, apparently.
Well, basically, there's a lot of good candidates for coaches for the Hall of Fame. I mean, Mike Shanahan was in there. Mike Holmgren, you mentioned. Tom Coughlin was in there as well. I mean, a lot of people considered it down between Shanahan and Holmgren. Took 2 different teams to the Super Bowl. Of course, Holmgren only won one of them. Well, Shanahan, of course, won twice. But I think the worst news for Shanahan moving forward is now Bill Belichick, if he doesn't coach again, becomes eligible next year, and the first year that he's going to be eligible, he's going to get in. Yeah. And Andy Reid, I mean, who knows how long he's going to keep coaching? The year after he might be eligible, so might be a couple years wait for Shanahan.
I don't like that. Sorry. My Bronco fan is going to come out here. That's crap. And it's sorry. But all right, guys, thanks for coming on and talking about that great game. It's the bye week, so we'll be on the bye week as well. We'll touch base, probably previewing the Colts sometime next week. This is coming at a great time for the Broncos. They need to get healthy a little bit. So yeah, all the coverage from last night's game is over at denvergazette.com. Subscribe to this podcast on Apple or on Spotify. And guys, enjoy the bye week, and we will catch up again next week, getting ready for the Colts.
All right.